Black teacher bullied by racist principal, but a letter from a student made the entire school district bow their heads. They said it wasn't racism. They said it was just policy. But when Ms. Daniels found her belongings in a cardboard box outside her classroom for the third time that semester, even the janitor couldn't look her in the eye. It was January, bitter cold, and the Michigan wind didn't play fair with feelings. The fluorescent lights in Fairbrook Elementary hummed like they didn't want to hear the silence in the teacher's lounge. No one spoke when she walked in anymore. Not even Michelle, the art teacher, who once shared her yogurt and her stories about dating her UPS guy. Ms. Alicia Daniels, 32, first-grade teacher, Harvard graduate, decorated twice by the district for innovation in reading curriculum, had been reduced to tiptoeing through hallways she used to own with her laughter. The trouble didn't begin with a slap or a slur. It never does. It began with a calendar. On the first day of Black History Month the year prior, Alicia had decorated her classroom door with portraits of Black trailblazers Langston Hughes, Katherine Johnson, John Lewis, Audre Lorde, along with quotes written in bright chalk paint by her students. Principal Marcus Breyer had frowned when he saw it. "I prefer if we keep political displays to a minimum, Ms. Daniels," he'd said, his pale knuckles gripping a clipboard too tight. "History isn't political," she'd replied. "Everything is political when it makes certain parents uncomfortable." She remembered blinking, just blinking. That was the first red flag, the first of many. The next month, her classroom budget was halved without notice. Then her reading program was reassigned to another teacher, a white teacher, for better alignment with district values. The science fair she organized was canceled. The after-school literacy group she ran voluntarily was shut down for violating overtime protocols. She never once raised her voice. Not until she found the evaluation form. It was slipped into her inbox without an envelope. One box stood out in red ink. Cultural sensitivity. Needs improvement. That night, Alicia cried in her car in the parking lot long after the last staffer had gone home. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. The worst part wasn't the injustice. It was the silence. The silence from her colleagues. The PTA. The school board. People she'd helped. Families she'd stayed late for. Students whose lives she'd changed. No one said anything. Except one. His name was Malik. 7 years old, soft eyes, wore a bow tie to class every Monday because Ms. Daniels once told him he looked sharp in one. He stuttered when excited and loved volcanoes. She kept his drawing a lava-spraying mountain with googly eyes taped to her desk. Malik noticed when she stopped smiling. He noticed when the lights in her eyes dimmed. And he noticed when she didn't return after spring break. Because after the third incident, after being publicly reprimanded for giving a student a book called Hair Love, Alicia had been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending review. They said it wasn't racism. They said it was due process. But every black student noticed her absence like a crack in the foundation. Malik's mom, Trina, called the district, left messages. No one returned them. Malik wrote a letter. Not to the principal. Not to the superintendent. He wrote it to the local newspaper. With help from Trina and his second-grade teacher who still believed in truth, Malik's letter got printed on page 6 of the Fairbrook Weekly Herald. The headline read, "Why did you take my teacher?" It was short, full of misspellings, messy, but no one could ignore it. "Ms. Daniels is my favorite teacher. She teaches me to read big words. She says my brown skin is beautiful. She helps me feel smart. If you don't want her because she is black, then you are not smart. I want her back. I want her back. I want her back." The letter went viral. Not in the flashy TikTok way, but in the slow burn, word of mouth, neighbor telling neighbor kind of way. Parents began asking questions. Teachers, too, in whispers at first. Then louder. Petitions formed. The school board meetings filled up. Local news stations called. And Principal Breyer began to sweat under his smug suit and tie. But Alicia didn't know any of that. Not yet. She was at home, avoiding mirrors, avoiding emails, holding her grandma's Bible in one hand and a list of job openings in another. She was already thinking about leaving Fairbrook, about leaving teaching altogether, until a knock came. It was her old neighbor, Mr. Riley 78, former Marine, didn't believe in email but read the paper religiously. "I saw it," he said. "That boy wrote something worth hearing." He handed her the clipping, folded neatly like it was scripture. Alicia read it 3 times. The tears came quietly, no sobs, just warmth leaking from a heart that hadn't felt full in weeks. The next morning, she dressed in her best navy blue suit, straightened her posture, walked into the district headquarters with a copy of Malik's letter in one hand and her lawyer in the other. The superintendent tried to play it cool, said it was a misunderstanding, that things got misconstrued, but Alicia didn't blink this time. "This isn't about misunderstanding," she said. "It's about pattern. And now you've got a witness." The district scrambled. Emails flew. Meetings were called. The PDA, previously silent, now buzzed with shame and urgency. Black parents held forums. White parents showed up. Malik's mom spoke with a fire that could melt stone. And suddenly, astonishingly, people began to care. Alicia was offered her job back with apologies, press releases, even a plaque. She refused. "I'm not coming back to be tolerated," she said. "I'm coming back when you've changed." But she did return, not to the classroom, but to the school board election. And she won. Alicia Daniels had never run for anything in her life, not student council, not prom queen, not even kickball captain in 5th grade. But standing at that podium in the gymnasium of her old high school, facing a crowd of over 200 restless parents, teachers, and students, she felt something she hadn't in months. Power. Not the kind that controls. The kind that inspires. She didn't read from a script. She didn't wear a button blazer or smile for the cameras like the other candidates. She told the truth, the whole raw, uncomfortable, necessary truth. "I stood in front of 7-year-olds and taught them the alphabet, while grown adults in power tried to erase who I was," she said. "I was punished for existing. I was punished for loving those kids with everything I had. But I am still here, and I will not be quiet anymore." Thunderous applause followed, not the polite kind. The kind that erupts when people have been waiting for someone to say what they've all been thinking but were too afraid to say out loud. She won in a landslide, 58% of the vote. She unseated a 10-year incumbent who had never once attended a Black History Month assembly. Her first act as a school board member, launching an independent investigation into administrative misconduct and racial bias within Fairbrook Unified. The investigation took months. The findings were damning. Emails, evaluations, backdoor conversations, all of it pointed to a pattern of discriminatory practices, especially targeting Black and brown educators. Alicia's own case was just the tip of the iceberg. Several teachers had left the district in the past 5 years under suspicious, performance-related exits. Many of them were Black women. One email, in particular, made Alicia's stomach turn. Principal Breyer had written to the assistant superintendent. "Ms. Daniels is problematic. Her insistence on cultural pride in the classroom alienates certain families. We need to prioritize teachers who don't bring personal agendas into the curriculum." The phrase "personal agendas" was underlined in Alicia's memory like a scar. When the report went public, local news stations ran back-to-back segments. Activists from across the state weighed in. Former students came forward with their stories of encouragement, of belonging, of learning to love themselves in classrooms like Alicia's. And for the first time in its 80-year history, Fairbrook Unified issued a public apology. It was posted on the district website. A press conference was held. There were solemn nods and carefully worded regret. But Alicia knew better than to mistake performance for progress. "I don't want your apology," she said bluntly to the superintendent after the cameras left. "I want your policies to change." And slowly they did. A diversity committee was formed, not in name only, but with real power. Hiring practices were overhauled. Curriculum expanded to include more authors of color. Bias training became mandatory, not optional. Parents of color were invited, truly invited, into decision-making spaces. Students of color were given platforms to speak without being punished for their tone. Still, not everyone celebrated. There were whispers of race card and reverse discrimination from corners too cowardly to speak their names out loud. Anonymous comments on district forums. Angry letters to the editor. Even a few threats. But Alicia didn't flinch. She had faced worse. And besides, she wasn't alone anymore. Michelle, the art teacher who once stayed quiet, now stood beside her at every board meeting, wearing a pin that read, "Daniels for Justice." Malik's mom joined the PDA and eventually ran it. Dozens of teachers who had once looked the other way now looked directly into the heart of the system and demanded more. Even Principal Breyer had to face consequences. After the report, he was placed on administrative leave. He resigned quietly 2 weeks later. No fanfare, no farewell emails, just silence. Alicia didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. His departure wasn't the victory. The victory was what came next. One evening, 3 months after the report's release, Alicia was invited back to Fairbrook Elementary. This time not as a teacher, not even as a board member, but as a guest of honor. Malik's class, now in 3rd grade, had organized a surprise tribute as part of a new school-wide Voices of Change initiative. She walked into the auditorium and was met with a wall of student-made posters. "We love Ms. Daniels. My skin is not a problem. Thank you for fighting for us." The lights dimmed. Projector clicked on. And a video montage began, clips of students reading poems, performing dances, reciting stories about when they felt proud to be who they were. In the final clip, Malik stood front and center, holding his original letter in one hand. He looked straight into the camera. "I didn't know what racism was when I wrote this," he said. "I just knew something was wrong. Ms. Daniels taught me that when something is wrong, you don't stay quiet. You speak, even if your voice shakes." Alicia sat in the front row, her eyes burning, a trembling hand pressed to her lips. She had dreamed of moments like this, but this was more. This was proof that all the pain, all the silence, all the cardboard boxes and red ink evaluations, they hadn't broken her. They had sharpened her. After the performance, a small girl with puffy braids and a rainbow backpack approached her. "Are you the lady who makes people listen?" Alicia smiled. "I try to be. Can I be one too?" Alicia kneeled, leveled her gaze with the girls. "You already are." That night, Alicia sat in her car for a long time. Not crying this time, not shaking, just breathing. She thought of her grandmother, who used to say, "Sometimes your job isn't to fix it. Sometimes it's just to be the spark." She thought of her students past and present. She thought of all the rooms where decisions were made without voices like hers. Not anymore. Now she was in the room, and she wasn't leaving. The first time Alicia stepped into a boardroom filled with state officials, she wasn't sure if she was shaking because of the cold air conditioning or the weight of what she was about to do. But when she looked at her notes and saw Malik's tiny, scrawled signature at the bottom of a printed copy of his letter, she remembered who she was fighting for. The Fairbrook case had ignited a statewide conversation. Other districts began opening their own investigations. Other teachers started speaking up. And somehow, Alicia Daniels, once silenced in her own classroom, had become the voice of a movement. The State Education Equity Conference had invited her to give the keynote address. "I didn't sign up to be a leader," she began, voice steady over the microphone. "I signed up to be a teacher. But when the system you serve tries to erase you, you have 2 choices: disappear or disrupt." Her words hung in the air like thunder. The audience rose of educators, lawmakers, parents didn't clap right away. They let the silence settle, the truth bite deep. Then came the applause. Fierce, earnest. A few people stood up, then more, until the entire room was on its feet. After the speech, Alicia was approached by a senator's aide. He asked her to join a statewide advisory panel on racial bias in education. She accepted. It wasn't about power. It was about purpose. She still woke up at 6 a.m., still answered emails from worried moms at midnight, still visited classrooms not as a teacher now, but as an advocate, walking the halls to make sure no other Alicia Daniels was being pushed into silence. Back at Fairbrook, things were changing. Slowly, painfully. The new principal, a black woman named Tanya Ross, had inherited a minefield. She moved with care but also fire. She restored Alicia's old reading program, reinstated the after-school literacy group, put up Black History Month displays in every hallway not as optional teacher projects, but as district-wide policy. She called Alicia one afternoon. "Can I ask a favor?" Tanya said. "Will you come read to the first graders? I think they should hear stories from the woman who made this all possible." Alicia agreed. She chose a book called Crown, an ode to the fresh cut, a celebration of Black boyhood and self-love. When she arrived, the kids greeted her like royalty. One girl ran up and hugged her legs before even asking who she was. A boy shouted, "You're the famous lady," and tried to get her autograph with a purple crayon. During the reading, Alicia watched their faces wide-eyed, joyful, full of questions and curiosity. She felt, for a moment, like she'd returned to herself. Afterward, one little boy, dark-skinned, quiet, nervous, raised his hand. "Did you really get kicked out because you're Black?" The room held its breath. Alicia knelt beside him. "Yes," she said. "Some people didn't like the way I taught or what I talked about. But that wasn't my fault. It wasn't yours either." The boy looked down. "But you came back." "I did," she nodded. "Because you're worth coming back for." Later that week, Alicia found an envelope on her desk at the district office. No stamp, just a name written in green crayon, Jamal. Inside was a note. "Dear Ms. Daniels, thank you for fighting. I didn't know people could do that. Now I think maybe I can be a fighter too. Your friend, Jamal." She kept that note in her wallet, right next to Malik's letter. She carried them like armor. But the battle wasn't over. When the state advisory panel released its recommendations, backlash came fast. Some school boards refused to implement the changes. Some teachers claimed the reforms were too political. Right-wing media ran headlines like, "Woke teachers push race agenda in schools." Alicia became a target. Again, emails, hate mail, voicemails that started with "you people" and ended with slurs. There were days she cried again, nights she doubted, moments when she stared into the mirror and wondered if it would ever stop the uphill climb, the resistance, the exhaustion of carrying both her identity and the expectations of a movement. But then she'd think of Malik, and Jamal, and the student who once whispered, "I want hair like yours when I grow up." And she kept going. One night, after a long town hall meeting where she'd had to defend a new inclusive curriculum for the 10th time that month, Alicia returned home to find a package on her porch. No return address. Inside was a binder, thick, heavy, taped to the front. "From your students." She opened it. Page after page after page, letters, drawings, photos from former students now in college, in careers, raising families. One letter read, "You taught me how to speak with my chest. Now I teach my students the same. I became a teacher because of you." Another, "In 4th grade, you told me I could be a writer. My first book just got published. You were the first person to see me." Alicia closed the binder, hands trembling. The silence she had once drowned in it was gone now, replaced by voices, echoes, gratitude, change. Months later, she sat on a panel for national education reform. She shared her story again, not for the spotlight, but because truth doesn't expire. After the session, a young woman approached her. 22, glasses, nervous smile. "I'm in my first year teaching," she said, "and I wanted to quit last week." Alicia looked at her gently. "What changed your mind?" "You," the girl said. "Your story." Alicia didn't say anything for a second, then smiled. "Then keep going. Because someone out there is watching you the same way you're watching me." The cycle was continuing, but this time in the right direction. Back in Fairbrook, Malik was preparing to graduate 5th grade. He had been chosen to give the closing speech at the ceremony. Alicia sat in the front row again, this time not as a guest, not as a symbol, but as a mentor. Malik stood at the podium, his bow tie slightly crooked, his voice shaking. "I used to think grown-ups didn't care, that they just let bad things happen," he began. But then I saw Ms. Daniels stand up, and people listened, and things changed. So now I know grown-ups can be heroes too. He paused, looked at her. And maybe, so can kids. The auditorium erupted in applause. Alicia stood, wiping tears she didn't try to hide. The boy who once wrote a letter that shook a district had now grown into a voice of his own. As the ceremony ended, a parent tapped Alicia on the shoulder. "My daughter wants to be a teacher," she said. "She says she wants to be like you." Alicia smiled, looked over at the girl, dark skin, eyes full of hope, and felt something deeper than pride. Legacy. Because change doesn't come all at once. Comes in ripples, in stories, in students, and sometimes in a single letter written with a crayon and a dream. Summer in Fairbrook arrived quietly, no fanfare, no fireworks. Just long days, soft winds, and children chasing each other barefoot in parks. But for Alicia Daniels, this summer marked something more. Turning point. A year had passed since she was forced out of her classroom. A year since Malik wrote the letter that cracked open the silence of an entire school system. And now everything had changed. She stood in front of the newly renamed auditorium, the Alicia Daniels Center for Equity in Education. She hadn't asked for that. In fact, when the board first suggested naming a building after her, she'd laughed a sharp, disbelieving laugh that came from years of being ignored. "Are you sure?" she had asked. "People might complain." "We're not doing this for people," Tanya, the new principal, replied. "We're doing this for the students who deserve to know who fought for them." So now it was real. Her name was etched into stone, not just metaphorically, but literally, in carved letters 5 inches tall, with gold leafing that shimmered when the sun hit just right. And on this warm July morning, families gathered under the trees, teachers sipped lemonade in folding chairs, and students lined up to sign a giant card that said, "Thank you, Ms. Daniels. You made us believe." Alicia didn't cry. She had already done enough of that in private. What she felt now wasn't sadness, or even vindication. It was peace. The ceremony began. Malik, now going into middle school, was the first to speak. He wore glasses now, and stood taller, but his voice still trembled with that same fire. "I wrote a letter because I thought no one would listen," he said. "But Ms. Daniels showed me that when you speak the truth, people have to hear it even if they don't want to. She made the world fairer for all of us. And now we have to keep going." The applause was long. Parents wiped tears. A teacher whispered, "That boy's gonna be president someday." When Alicia finally stepped to the mic, the crowd went silent. She took a breath, looked out over the faces, black, white, brown, tan, old, young, a community that had once been divided by fear, now stitched together by courage. "I used to think I was alone," she said. "When I packed up my classroom, when I stood in front of the board begging for my job, when I sat at home wondering if all my work had been for nothing, I felt invisible." She paused. "But then a child, a brave, beautiful child, wrote a letter. And in that moment, I realized something. We are never invisible to the people we impact." People nodded, tears welling. A mother clutched her son's hand. A grandfather whispered, "Amen." "I didn't fight because I was brave," Alicia continued. "I fought because silence was no longer an option, because the cost of staying quiet was higher than the risk of speaking up." Then she looked directly at the students. "This is your world now. You get to decide what kind of classrooms you want, what kind of leaders you'll be. And when someone tells you that who you are is a problem, you tell them this: I am not the problem. I am the proof that change is possible." The crowd stood as one. No music, no cue, just heart. After the speeches, the celebration continued. Music, food, laughter. Alicia mingled with old colleagues and new faces. She posed for photos with children who didn't even know the full story but smiled like they could feel something important had happened. Then, as the sun dipped low and families began to leave, a girl approached her. 12, maybe 13. Freckles, holding something in her hand. "Hi," the girl said, nervous. "I wrote you something." Alicia smiled gently. "Can I read it now?" The girl nodded. The note was folded 3 times, the handwriting neat but pressed hard like she had written it with fierce intention. Dear Ms. Daniels, I've always been scared to talk about how people treat me. I don't look like anyone in my class. Kids ask me where I'm really from. But then I heard your story, and I realized I don't have to be quiet. You made me feel proud. So thank you. P.S. I want to be a teacher like you. Alicia held the letter to her chest. She looked at the girl and said the same words that once healed her. You already are. 3 years later, Alicia Daniels sat in the back of a packed auditorium, not the one named after her, but 100s of miles away, a national education summit. She was there as a guest, not a speaker. On stage, a confident, grown-up version of Malik adjusted the mic. He was now 15 sharp, composed, a natural leader. My name is Malik Thompson, he began. And I'm here because one person decided to believe in the power of a voice. The crowd leaned in. Alicia Daniels didn't just teach. She disrupted. She didn't just speak, she listened. And because she did, an entire school system changed. I'm here because of her. And I'm not the only one. He lifted his head, unwavering. I'm here to say we are not done. Equity is not a moment. It's a movement. Alicia's heart swelled. Not pride. Legacy. 1 week later, she returned to Fairbrook. She no longer worked for the school district. Her work had expanded: consulting, speaking, mentoring. But she still came home. She walked through the old halls of her former school, touched the walls she once decorated with student poems and Black history posters, paused outside room 212, the classroom where everything started. Alicia pushed the door open slowly. Inside was a new teacher, young, Afro-Latina, bright smile, students sitting in a circle reading a book about heroes. The teacher turned, startled. Oh, hi. Can I help you? Alicia smiled. I used to teach here. The teacher blinked. Wait, you're Ms. Daniels? Alicia nodded. The woman rushed over and hugged her. I read everything about what you did. You're the reason I applied here. I just wanted you to know your classroom is safe. Always. Alicia looked around. There were books by Toni Morrison and Jason Reynolds on the shelf. A Black Lives Matter poster on the back wall. A student drawing that said, My skin is magic. She smiled. Thank you, she whispered. As she left, she passed the front office. A new plaque hung where the old principal's name used to be. In honor of all educators who stand, speak, and stay. Alicia Daniels didn't need her name on it. She had already written it in places that mattered more: in hearts, in letters, in history. Epilogue. Years later, a student would write an essay titled, The Woman Who Saved My Voice. It would win a national contest, be published in a youth journal, and start with one line. She was just a teacher, but she changed the whole damn system. And when Alicia Daniels read it, gray at the edges, wrinkles of wisdom creasing her smile, she closed her eyes, placed her hand over her heart, and whispered back, I was never just a teacher. I was always a fighter. And the world at last had listened. Nd.